Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on rights retention and licensing for OA books webinar. Just to let you know that we are recording this event. If you don't feel comfortable with that, then I'll need to ask you to leave now. But it's just to enable those who couldn't attend to be able to view the webinar. Thank you so much for coming. We have about 45 of us with us today. I think just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you feel comfortable having your cameras on, it's always good to see you. Please put your questions in the chat. We don't have a Q&A, so do share them in the chat. But I think we will be mainly focusing on listening to some of the experts in the first half, and then you'll have lots of time for discussion in the second half of the webinar in the breakout sessions. So are we nearly finished with admitting people, and then I can start? Just 1 second.
There's still some people coming, but we are admitting them.
Okay, that's good. So,
however, I do not see Ignacy, to be honest.
Well, if you can kind of follow that, just 1 second. So can everybody see and hear me now? Sorry about that, that hiccup. So, so this session is run by the Open Access Books Network, which is a free open network for anyone interested in open access books. I think many of you are already members, and if not so, please do join us. Have a look at the link below. It was founded by members of OAPEN, Operas, Scholar-Led and Spark Europe. And it's coordinated by Lucy Barnes, Tom Mostert and Agatha Morka, and two of those are speaking today. My name is Vanessa Proudman and I'm Director of Spark Europe, and I'm your host for today. So I think many of you have already participated in some of the other sessions on the scope, quality assurance and transparency, on green OA for books, and discoverability and metadata, and this is the last in the series. So the structure is similar to the other ones. The first session is a policy discussion with invited speakers, and so please do add your questions in the chat box. And for the second half, we have breakout rooms, several breakout rooms, and the speakers will also be attending those breakout rooms. And we really encourage discussion, open discussion, no steering of any views. We want to gather as many viewpoints as possible, and please take note of those, because we will be bringing those together. Agatha and myself are working on that, bringing those notes together to synthesize them and to pass that on to Coalition S. So today we have speakers from a range of stakeholders with an interest in rights retention and open licensing. We have Lucy Barnes from the Open Book Publishers, Matthew Day from Cambridge University Press, Ignacy Labastida-Hiwan from the University of Barcelona, representing libraries and researchers, universities, Agatha Morka from Spark Europe and OABN, Laura Speicher from UCL Press, and Elspeth Tot-Cifra from Daria. And we have Toby Steiner, who will be helping with the timekeeping and the breakout rooms master. And we've got Tom, we've got two more Toms helping in the background. So thank you very much for their support today. So just looking at the agenda, I will hand you over in a second to the 5 experts. looking at their perspective on rights retention and open licensing for books and the challenges and the future. And then we'll have a short panel discussion on how do we find a copyright policy that balances the needs of publishers, funders, institutions, and researchers. And then we have a briefing on the breakouts and breakouts. So before we get started, I'd like to first to say a few words on why rights retention and open licensing is so important to open research. So first of all, I'd like to take you back almost 20 years to the Budapest Declaration, where I quote, it said, "By open access, we mean its free availability on the public internet, permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute without financial, legal, or technical barriers." So it's not just about access. And in the last 20 years, so many of us have been working on implementing this goal to increase the impact of publicly funded research. So it's not about green or gold or any other color. We want immediate OA to our scholarship, but the author doesn't necessarily have the rights to immediately store or reuse it, which is why open licensing is so important. And whilst the book is a key core scholarly output for many disciplines, we know that long form publications are inaccessible to so many for reasons of price, due to licensing limitations or embargoes to self-archived versions. And we also know that the context of funding books is different to journal publishing. So that's important for today as well to keep in mind. What's important is to empower our authors to share and reuse their work in education and research. And we can make the life of the author easier by calling for a copyright policy that supports open access to research and its reuse. And we need to have a legal and a policy framework that alleviates this for the coming years, that supports a new way also of evaluating research outputs. And I'd like to end by saying that for society to continue to trust in science and scholarship, public institutions have a responsibility to provide transparency to what it's invested in through OA. So it's really important that we enable all those to publish OA. We need to do this for reasons of equity and inclusion, and rights retention and open licensing policies can really facilitate that. So I'd now like to pass you on to our experts of today, who will share their views on how this might be realized in practice, how they are realizing it if they're publishers with us today, and what some of the challenges are. Unfortunately, they only have 5 minutes each, but it's over to them. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hopefully you can all see my slides. Can everyone see those?
So I'm welcoming Lucy Barnes from Open Book Publishers. We can see your slides, but not in presentation mode.
Ah, okay. Let's try that again. How about that?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank
So
you.
hi everyone, my name's Lucy Barnes and I'm an editor and outreach coordinator at Open Book Publishers. I'm going to talk briefly about who OBP is, for those of you who don't know us and what sort of publisher we are. I'm going to discuss our approach to rights retention and licensing. I'm going to touch briefly on third-party materials and finally a particular challenge related to the CC BY license. So OBP is a leading independent open access book publisher. We're based in Cambridge. We've been going since 2008, so almost 13 years. We're a not-for-profit press run by academics. You can see the 3 directors there. And the founding aim of the press and what governs all of our work is to make research freely available everywhere. So to that end, all of our books are published open access. They're all carefully peer reviewed. We don't charge authors to publish open access with us. We fund ourselves through a mixture of sales of paperback, hardback, and some EPUB and Mobi editions, as well as grants if authors are able to secure them. If not, that's fine. And also a library funding program that we have. We published over 200 books, and we're roughly publishing a rate of between 30 to 40 books a year at the moment. So our approach to licensing and copyright is fairly straightforward. The author retains the copyright, and they grant us non-exclusive rights to distribute their book. And you can see in that box there the wording that we use. Non-exclusive rights to sell and distribute hard copies, and to make electronic copies of the work available anywhere in the world. So if the author wants to withdraw those rights from us, they have to give 5 years notice. This is just to protect us. Obviously, we don't want to put a lot of time and work into making a book if we're not then going to be able to distribute it. So we have that as a kind of protection for us. But other than that, it's a fairly straightforward arrangement, as I've described, and it's worked very well. We've never had an issue with it. I'm not aware of any author who've exercised their rights to withdraw, this is a sort of straightforward approach that's worked very well for us. In terms of how the books are licensed, the author can choose the license. We use Creative Commons licenses. They can choose NC&D. They can choose whichever license they prefer. We recommend CC BY because it enables maximum reuse, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But the author is free to choose. So in terms of third-party licensing, I just wanted to touch on this because I think sometimes it's brought up as a kind of objection to open access that you won't be able to include third-party materials in an open access book. So this is just some examples of where we've done precisely that. You can, if a third-party material, if an image, if a piece of video, a piece of audio is openly licensed itself, obviously you can include that according to the terms of the open license. And if it's copyrighted, you can apply to include the material just as you would with a closed access book. So we've got this book here, Essays on Paolo Rego, which is a book about the contemporary artist Paolo Rego, which has over 181 images in it. We've got a series of 6 books here about the Juggler of Notre Dame and the adaptations of that story throughout history, and that's got over 1,000 images in the 6 books. We've got a book, Catherine Rudy's Image Knife and Glue Pot, which has over 137 images, manuscript images, plus 108 linked images. And this is interesting because what Kate Rudy did with her funding was to make some of those images, those linked images, rather than applying to have them just reproduced in her book, she applied to have them put up online so that anyone can consult them, anyone can link to them from their own work. And that's an interesting way of approaching third-party images. So in terms of the CC BY content, this is a specific issue that we sort of wanted to bring up in relation to the CC BY license. CC BY obviously enables broad reuse, including commercial reuse. And that can include things that people don't necessarily think of when they think of commercial reuse. So for example, if you have an educational website which shares open resources, but which makes money by advertising, then that's classed as commercial reuse. And also for us, I mentioned in the previous slide that we use third-party material in our books. And if an image is licensed NC, then because we make money from selling paperback and hardback to help fund our open access work, that's technically commercial use. So we would then have to apply if we wanted to use any of that material, and it wouldn't be licensed for us to use. But the CC BY license also enables commercial outfits like the St. Philip Street Press, which is something which has came to our notice in around October last year. So St. Philip Street Press is an outfit that reprints CC BY content, charging usually more than the publishers are doing. They do this, they've done this to a range of presses, including us, including UCL, including Routledge, Palgrave. And this is rare, this isn't something which happens a lot, but it's also an anticipated potential consequence of the CC BY license. And you might argue that there's actually an advantage to it, in the sense that this is a wider distribution of the material. So if St. Philip Street Press has access to markets that we aren't necessarily reaching, then there will be a version of the book being sold in those markets. But it is an inferior edition because the third-party material has to be taken out of the book. And so it's an inferior edition. It also has to link back to the OBP edition as a term of the CC BY license. It has to link back to our edition. So there is that kind of awareness building, I suppose, of our book, but it's not an ideal situation. And actually the main issue for us isn't so much a licensing issue as a distribution issue, particularly with Amazon, because Amazon blends the 2 editions of the book together. So if you click onto, for example, this book here, The Jewish Unions in America on Amazon, you'll see, if you click on the hardcover button, you can see our book there. But if you just click across onto the paperback, you then are presented with the St. Philip Street Press edition. So in that instance, because the 2 editions, the two publisher editions of the book are presented in a single listing, that's certainly cannibalizing our sales. And this is the kind of major issue for us, really. You can see here on the book depository, again, the St. Philip Street Press books are listed, but they're listed separately. You can see all 4 editions. You can see that ours are cheaper. You can see our cover is nicer than the kind of generic cover that St. Philip Street Press uses. So this is a kind of distribution issue, really, for us, rather than specifically a licensing issue. So there are things that we can do to kind of mitigate this. We can contact Amazon to try to untangle the distribution issue, which we're making slow progress with. We can add author-approved edition to metadata. Authors can request that their name is removed from St. Philip Street Press edition, and for example, Professor Martin Eve has done this and has written about the experience of doing that. So far, there's no evidence that our sales have been impacted. Certainly, we will have lost some sales to this, but not to the extent that it's undercut our sales, that we can see where our sales are increasing, in fact, over the last couple of years. And there has been some author concern, mainly actually so far for us and for our revenue, which maybe suggests that we have very generous authors. But I think certainly some authors will be concerned that there is a edition of their work circulating, which is of lesser quality. And so I think it's important, therefore, for authors to understand the implications of the CC BY license, but also for the policy discussion that we're having, for policy to recognise that authors might have a good reason for wanting their choice when it comes to the licensing of their work. And hopefully that was just about 5 minutes.
I was just gonna intervene here, but yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Don't see any questions in the chat. So now I'd like to invite Lara Speicher from UCL Press to tell us about their experience with rights retention and open licensing. Lara.
Thank you, Vanessa, and hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to join this this really interesting panel on a very important topic. So I don't have any slides to share. I plan just to quickly talk about UCL Press and our activities, and about our approach to rights retention and licensing, and some of our experiences, which are quite similar to the ones Lucy has just described. UCL Press was established in 2015. It was the UK's first fully open access university press. We publish books and journals, and in that time, in the last 6 years, we've published over 190 books, and we're publishing about 50 books a year now. And those books and our journals have been downloaded over 4.5 million times around the world. In terms of rights retention, like open book publishers, the author retains copyright in their work and grants us the first imprint rights on a non-exclusive basis. The choice of license is also up to the author. We recognise that in humanities and social sciences, in particular, authors have real concerns about ND, the non-derivative licence, because of the importance of retaining the precise form of words for the arguments they're putting forward. And so in defining our policies, we took on board a range of decisions and understood that particular point of view. Until relatively recently, we have been recommending CC BY as it allows the widest range of sharing and reuse, and over 50% of our authors had chosen CC BY. However, when it recently came to light that St. Philip Street Press, which you've just been hearing about, was also taking copies of books that we published under a CC BY licence, and those of other OA presses, as Lucy mentioned, and publishing print versions for sale in their own imprint, we reviewed our policy. And while the St. Philip Street Press activity was legal under the terms of the licence, it was unacceptable to us and to our authors that somebody else was able to profit from works in which we had invested significant time and money to publish. So we are now recommending CC BY NC to our authors in order to prevent this happening in future, with ND if desired. But if authors do still want another form of licence and has a strong preference, or if the funder requires it, then of course we will still publish under CC BY, and we take efforts to explain to authors the implications of the different licences. So when it comes to defining policy, clearly there are a lot of different viewpoints to take on board, and it is important to understand the views of all those stakeholders. And and also to understand the potential for these unintended consequences or anticipated consequences, but the fact that they will be viewed quite differently by different people in the system. So thank you very much, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lara. Don't see any questions as yet. Now it's over to Matthew Day then from Cambridge University Press. Matthew.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, so yes, I'm Matthew Day from Cambridge University Press. I'm Head of Open Research Policy and Partnerships. So I work across books and journals in quite a general way. I want to make some general comments about the relationship between publishers and authors, you know, the licensing relationship. There are differences between books and journals, as people have said already. I think if once we start to talk about differences in terms of licensing, though, we're getting into details, because I think the general principles are common to both. And I think the first general principle is just to give ourselves a bit of a pass, really, because copyright and licensing is not simple. It's not simple for anyone. It's not simple for the legal experts, and it's certainly not simple for the rest of us. There are very few statements that you can say, you know, kind of clearly and unambiguously that work in all, you know, in all places at all times for all things. It's just inherently difficult, and the roots of the legal complexity. But in a sense, the legal complexity is not our problem. The problem that we all need to work on, because no one wants to end up in court. Nobody, as far as I can tell, even the more litigious publishers don't want to end up in court. But it's the more social aspects and the other aspects of rights and licensing that are still contentious, that where I think we need to focus. And some of the debate and discussions around how you can have full, complete, embargo-free open access, the licensing frameworks for that are really kind of quite contentious and polarized. And that, frankly, that's not helpful. I think we all need to work from a position of trying to understand each other and find ways through the complexity to something that works and delivers immediate embargo-free open access publishing. So, but there are some things you can state clearly, and I would say that authors should keep copyright as a general statement, that publishers don't need the copyright in order to achieve what they want to do. But what the publisher does need to do is they need to be able to come to an agreement with the author. The author and the publisher need to come to a mutual agreement that allows the publisher to be able to publish the work in a way that serves the author and the wider community, and the author and the publisher can do that in a kind of a sustainable way, we would say. And for CUP, sustainable means modest surpluses or profits. We can do it at high scale. And as I said, we can serve the community. You know, what's published is actually fit for purpose. So we don't need copyright to do that, but we do need to have some control, right? So the Martini blog post, I think, he really should be commended for being honest about, you know, he had some optimistic assumptions about what publishing a book of CC BY would mean, and the reality was it wasn't quite the way he imagined. Well, I commend him for being open and honest about that, because I think it requires us to really understand what's going on when we publish under certain licenses and what's going to be the effect. Rights retention is, it's difficult for me, because CUP is, as a university press, CUP wants to be on the side of the angels. We are part of the University of Cambridge. Our mission is to serve scholarly communications. Profit and surplus is just a means to an end and shouldn't be excessive. It hurts us when we're not seen to be on the side of the angels, and with rights retention, we're not quite seen to be on the side of the angels, because I think we have some. We're trying to make sure that we don't have that we want to make sure that we can continue to publish in a sustainable way, in an open access way, and we are moving open access, and that includes books at scale, right? That's a big statement for someone like CUP to make, but that's what we're trying to do. So rights retention is where, you know, clear statements are made to an author by a third party that says, don't worry about the agreement you've come to with the publisher. Don't worry about what the publisher's saying, because you can do whatever you want. And you can you know, that just don't worry about it. The legal case is clear. We're telling you, but don't worry about it. No one's going to take you to court. You know, it's watertight. It's a clean, simple story, but it's nothing, as I said, is simple in copyright, and it's difficult for us if we can't come to an agreement with an author, you know, a mutual understanding. What rights do we need in order to be able to publish your work in a high quality way, you know, and to be able to continue doing that. So it's a complex landscape, but I want to just reiterate the point that it does the answers to these problems. Rights retention, you know, the rights retention was designed to solve some very real problems. Economic problems, complexity of different publishers' policies, everyone being baffled, nothing working, nothing immediate. You know, the problems are real, but the rights retention, we would say, is not necessarily the right solution to them. But there has to be a solution to them, and it will only really be found by kind of engaging and working through the issues. And some of the issues are people being completely honest and clear about what they want. Right, so some people want to use rights retention to hurt publishers, and some people want to use it just as a way so that authors don't have to worry about what they can do and they can publish anywhere and everything's immediately free OA. These, you know, what we as a publisher need to do to serve people's needs depends on what those needs are. So some clarity around that. And I just want to very quickly end on a point that so with our university, Cambridge University Library, you know, they're our sister organization. It's taken us 2 years of talking about rights retention to come to a common understanding where we think we generally understand what the other one's saying, and we can start to see a way forward. The university likes rights retention because for various reasons, and we don't for other reasons, but we understand the reasons, and we're trying to find a way forward and to think about what would be a policy that would work. So it's difficult. And it's not simple, and anyone I would say who suggests otherwise is probably not being completely straight. But it's great. Events like today where we can explore it and bring different voices together, I think are really important. In fact, they're completely necessary for this, for us to make good progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. You did hit the nail on the head that it's a very complex issue, that's true. And I also agree that we really need to discuss more, and that's why we brought you all together. Thank you very much also for your honesty, and it would be good to hear more from you in the breakout rooms, as well as other voices reacting to that. So thanks for your time. The next one up, who also knows all about the complexities of copyright and open licensing, that's Ignasi Labastide-Iwan from Barcelona. Ignasi, I think you're with us.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes,
hello,
welcome.
Melissa. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm not an expert. I mean, I'm someone who has experienced the license for almost 20 years. I just tweet that Creative Commons is celebrating its 20th anniversary, and since February 2003, we are struggling by understanding and let people know about how to use the CC license. Because I think that the cases that we already have heard in this afternoon are cases where we realized that sometimes the use of the license is not really well understood. And people sometimes uses a CC BY license thinking that it's cool, that it's more, it's better to be more open, but without really understanding the challenge that the use of this license concerns. I think that's something that we have to learn together. Publishers, researchers, institutions, funders, to understand the real meaning and of taking a decision about the license. I sometimes I hear, and I heard already today, the ND, the famous why I'm not using ND. Well, I have always to explain that there are two different things. One thing is the integrity, the right of integrity, and another thing is the derivative work. With ND, nobody can change the original book. What you can provide is the facility to make derivative works, and that's something that I really try to explain every time people try to figure out if I can make a derivative work or not. NC, we always have NC in many places, and we know that it's some of the tools that we can use, for instance, to provide to prevent these misuses that some publishers are, we just heard, are doing. But putting MC, we have to decide who can lift the NC, and these are things that at the beginning we don't really realize. I can share with you an experience of the Ministry of Education in Spain. They put an NC in a book with a lot of authors there. And people were asking afterwards, can I use it commercially? I want to even pay for that. I mean, ask permission. And the problem was that nobody knew who was the real copyright owner of that contribution. So sometimes when we use a license, we don't realize who can make decisions on that work. So we can discuss later on if it's better to use CC by Y or to use NC or ND. My answer is always there is not the best license. One size does not fit all. I always ask people to think about what is the purpose of putting a license in a work. But please, if you use a license, if you decide not to go to the all right reserve, think about the consequences of using that license and think who is the one who can provide more than the rights that the license just grant by default. And in this case, we are discussing today with the books, it's important to know when we authorize, license, transfer, whatever rights to a publisher, to think clearly who can lift that. Will be the publisher, will be the authors, will be together. I mean, there could be a co-holding of the copyright. So I think these are things that sometimes are not taken into account, and if you don't take that from the beginning, we can end in some problems, not in court or not in litigations, just some problems afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ignacy. It's so true that we need to raise the awareness and understanding of those different open licenses, and also to understand who owns that work, and so who can assign the license. So thank you very much for highlighting those important aspects. It's now over to Elspeth Tot-Cifra from Derriere.
Yes, hello everyone, and thanks for having me once again. Can you hear me? Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So my name is Elspeth Tot-Cifra. I am the Open Science Officer of Derriere. Derriere is a European research infrastructure consortium for the digitally enabled arts and humanities. So we are a public organization providing research support for humanists across Europe. And I decided to start with this quite sensible, very compact definition coming from my colleague Pavel Kamotsky, who is a linguist and a legal expert. A license is a formalized promise not to sue. And I think that one reason why I like this definition is because it reflects beautifully the sentiments around conversations about licensing in academia. So as Matthew and others already, and Ignacy as well, already acknowledged, this is a complex matter. So here I collected a sample of the most common issues that usually came up in Derriere's open access, open science advocacy practice, so you can cherry pick from them. As one, directly connecting to what Vanessa just said, the complexity starts with ownership, right? So in many cases, we need to need to explore together whether it is the research team who holds the intellectual property rights over their work, or in many cases in Ireland, in the United Kingdom, it is the research institutions. So will I be fear from getting plagiarized? There are many misconceptions about open licenses and citation how more restrictive licenses put limitations on citations, what is fair use, already mentioned by others like the third-party materials, the complexities about third parties upstream and downstream. From all these questions, there is one issue that is somewhat domain-specific in the social sciences and humanities fields that I would like to highlight here, and maybe later on in the breakout we can discuss it further with Ignacy. But so once again about the non-derivatives and their common perception within the SSH field. So although we do know that it's true that the CC BY 4.0 license protects the integrity of the work by requiring any modifications of the content to be fully indicated, but it does not preclude the possibility to include the content as it is in a part of a larger collection, larger context, a compilation, or work that can pursue particular ideological and political objectives. So this is crucial for SSH, where research objects are people in their social and cultural life. So those researchers work under specific ethical conditions, and this is what I want to highlight here. Choosing a license is not always only a question of only intellectual property rights and reuse rights and balancing between interest of creators and possibility of reuse by the public, but there are also ethical considerations here that we need to acknowledge. To tell you a little bit about Doria's efforts pointing to this direction, Doria has an open science help desk because we see that there is quite an inequality across Europe when it comes to support structures or institutional support structures in terms of intellectual property rights and ethics and legality for scholars. So researchers can turn to us regarding all kinds of questions about the open research culture. Here you can find a pseudonymized example and the question is about the NC and ND and all the complexities, all the multiple elements that a Creative Commons license can include. So I think it's a pretty typical one. And let me also highlight the YouTube video that I linked here. It's a presentation, a wonderful presentation of Walter Schorger, a colleague of mine from the University of Graz, who is chairing the Daria Ethics and Legality Working Group, and whose contribution are quite crucial when it comes to complexities and licensing. Also, just to give you a little food for the thought, like for the coming conversations about the actual topic of this workshop, PLANAS and licensing and books. So I think it is worth to ask the question, what can we learn from PLANAS right retention policy that had been developed for research articles, right? We know that it was a great chunk of work. It was a very complex and super high effort from the coalition as members to create pathways through all these complexities. But if you take a look at just the overview that I copied here from Rob Johnson's tweet, this is super complex, right? So we know that rights retention is really a cornerstone of genuine transition to open access. This is really a must in terms of taking control or taking back control over our intellectual properties. But it's really difficult to see through for an average researcher, I think. This we can immediately see. Back and forth thing between the different versions and when to inform the publisher and which version to put where under which, it's super complex. But there is another thing I want to highlight here, namely that this complex implementation plan, not surprisingly and essentially, is built on concepts that are established in the context of research articles, but not necessarily books, right? There is not a strong green open access community practice when it comes to books. It's not impossible, but still it's not a default procedure. The versioning of books is a little bit even more complex, and we shouldn't forget, I think we really cannot have these conversations about licensing without closing eyes over the fact that first monographs are usually coming from PhD dissertations. So I foresee a great deal of complexities on that point as well. But in any case,
Elizabeth, I'm very sorry, but the time frame of 5 minutes has passed now. Could you maybe come to the conclusion?
Yeah, this is the conclusion.
Sorry, okay.
But thanks for reminding Toby, and so sorry for speaking longer. So here is the thing. This is kind of, it's not a symbol of Freemasons, it's a symbol of a framework that I propose to keep in mind for discussions, a power triangle of rights retention and conversations about licensing. The idea I wanted to communicate here is that policymakers, scholarly communities, including universities and publishers, should be equal corners of this triangle, and conversations will only be balanced if there is a fluid discussion between these three actors. Thanks a lot for your attention, and sorry for being a little bit longer.
Thank you very much, Elspeth, for highlighting the ethical considerations, also the differences between books and journals. And we're going to touch on the power struggles shortly. But before we do that, I'm going to invite Agata Morka to highlight, she's been looking at some of the research funded policies that do describe rights retention or open licensing, or perhaps largely do not. But Agata, you've got 5 minutes to whiz us through that, and then we can have a little discussion about the power imbalances. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I think that 5 minutes is far enough, because you will see that there is actually not that much being said about licensing and rights retention in the policies that I looked at. Give me just a second. I will share my screen with you and show you what I discovered. So, okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, not in presentation mode yet, but I'm sure that's going to change any second.
Hopefully it will. Okay, good. So, so as Vanessa mentioned, before we started the series of these conversations of the voices from the OA Books network communities and OA Books experts talking about different issues that have to do with open access books in the context of a Plan S, I have done some research looking into existing funders' policies, just to have a look at what is already out there and what it is that the funders are saying, how they are defining their policies when it comes to open access books. So I looked at 63 funders from Europe and from the United Kingdom, and among them, 27 had existing open access books policies, because most of them, even if they have open access policies, in most cases they pertain to journals. There aren't that many cases which mention books specifically. So we prepared this, we put together this open document, and of course I encourage you to add to it. We've been advertising this document over during the series of these meetings. So thank you very much for those who actually added some policies there. And here is what I wanted to show you, what we discovered about licensing. So out of these 27 policies that we looked at that mention OA books specifically, there is lots of complexity going on. So I'm afraid that I won't make it any easier on you. I will only add another layer of complexity here. So some funders policies make CC BY required. Some of them talk about CC BY in the context of it being a preferred license, but there are also other CC licenses that are permitted. In other cases, we have CC licenses as recommended. Other licenses which are mentioned other than CC BY, because of course CC BY is mentioned the most in these policies. But however, there is also CC0, CC BY SA, and of course more restrictive licenses like CC BY NC, CC BY NC and D. But there are also lots of cases where licensing is not at all specified, not at all mentioned in these policies. So what I would like to look at here and focus on a little bit more is also the wording that is used in these policies, because yet again here we have another level of complexity, and it's very diverse as to how the policies define which licenses should be used, or rather how they not define it, or how they leave some freedom there. So among different possible wordings that I came upon were these listed here. So either these licenses are required, perhaps sometimes they are preferred, sometimes even more gently they are recommended, or permitted, or very politely encouraged. There is absolutely no uniformity when it comes to how funders speak about their preferred licenses. Here also in terms of more precise wording about licensing. So as I mentioned, of course, different kinds of Creative Commons licenses are being called on. So specific examples as CC BY, CC BY NC, and so on and so on. Of course, in terms of some special organizations, they require the use of special IGO licenses. So that's another type that comes into conversation here. But sometimes the wording is completely different. And what the funder says is open licenses or other licenses with equivalent rights, however, whatever that exactly means. Or even more interestingly, or more broadly, suitable open licenses shall be used that recognize the legal rights to information products and encourage their use and adaptation. So again, a very polite definition. What exactly is included in it, who knows? When it comes to rights retention, this is something which is very, very rarely mentioned in these existing policies. And I think that I came across two cases where it was said that authors or institutions are encouraged to retain copyrights. And in some cases, it was also said that authors, that the funder recommends authors to sign non-exclusive licenses only. So last but not least, I think that we are looking at all of these policies. So out of 27, there were 11 cases where there was no mention whatsoever about licensing or rights retention policy. So it seems that the issue is so complex that perhaps some funders prefer not to mention it. But what I would like us to do today is I would like to encourage that we should mention these policies this issue, because it's a huge one. And I think that this is what we're going to do in the breakout rooms today. So if I have one recommendation, whatever we put in the policy, however we imagine Plan S for books to be, I think that it should definitely touch on the question of licenses, and we should not shy away from mentioning it. And one recommendation: let's be clear about what we want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great message at the end, Agatha. And you clearly showed how complex it is in practice, also for policymakers. So I think before we go into the breakout rooms, and we will have a few minutes break, I would like to come back to Esapet's, not the triangle specifically, but I'd like to come back to looking at those. We've been discussing a range of stakeholders, the experts, have this afternoon, talking about the role of publishers, the role of funders, policymakers, institutions, and researchers. So I'd like the experts all to put their cameras on if they had already turned them off. No, I think they're all on. And I'd like you to, somebody to start us off, really. So how do we find a copyright policy that balances the needs of publishers, funders, institutions, and researchers? And I think Matt was also touching on that point. Maybe somebody other than Matt, because he's already encouraged us to think about that, to start us off on this discussion. Who'd like to start? Don't be shy.
Vanessa, I just raised my hand.
Oh, please do. No need to raise your hands, just go ahead.
Whatever.
Thanks.
No, just a reflection. I think because it's something that always some people, some authors come to me and ask me. And I think we have to establish like two kinds of relationship: author to publisher and author, publisher to public. So sometimes when we decide to publish some book in a CC license, so for instance, CC BY NC, whatever, some authors doesn't understand if it's non-commercial, how a publisher can commercialize my book. So I think we have to find a way to establish this in the idea of this triangle, let's say that way, to find this idea of to have an agreement with the publisher, and together with the publisher to have an agreement with the public. As Elsbeth was quoting, when we use the license, we are trying to open, we are trying not to sue, etc., etc. So I think, going back to your question, I think we have to find out these two ways of having this agreement: author with the publisher and author publisher with the public.
Thank you. Anybody like to respond or bring in another viewpoint?
Could I just say that, in support of what Ignacio's just said, that not directly answering the question you posed, Vanessa, but I think understanding of the licenses is a huge issue in itself. Author understanding of them, institution understanding, because they are so complex. And I think that misunderstanding that Ignacio just raised is one that we've come across, and I think publishers spend a huge amount of time explaining this to authors and other stakeholders. So I think that's quite a big hurdle before we can even get to a policy that works for everybody.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to respond?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that as well. And I think it's tricky actually when you start thinking about policy prescriptions. I think in this area, in some respects, what we're all saying in different ways is that we wouldn't want anything to be too prescriptive. That obviously, as Advocacy said, it shouldn't ignore the issue completely. But that if you start saying something like, well, everything has to be CC BY or whatever, there are significant drawbacks with that. And what would be best would be if you could engage the authors in a knowledgeable discussion about how do they best want to license their work, and obviously on the understanding that is in an open way. But then beyond that, I think a policy has the potential to constrain author choice in ways that might not be ideal, and also then I suppose potentially also put authors off the idea of open access, because I think part of the issue with policy is it tends to often be stick and not carrot. And I think one of the things that is important when I'm talking to authors about open access is helping authors to understand the possibilities, what open access can enable for their work and enable their work to do. And if you're just kind of waving a stick at them and saying, well, the policy says you want to publish it this way, it's not necessarily meaningful in the way that it should be.
Thank you.
So Vanessa, I have a comment if you. So I think what's tricky here is balancing the end goal, defining the end goal, right? So if funders can define the end goal but leave flexibility for how the end goal is achieved, now that's probably what we need, right? As a scholarly communication community, we need ability to be able to try different things or explore new ways. So Plan S funders, for example, have just been incredible enablers of open access, right? There's no doubt that there's a lot more open access, or there will be even more, a lot more open access as a result of their policies, right? I mean, so they've been a colossal enabler. But they're also constricting, increasingly actually kind of regulating, you could say, but also you could say constricting. So the policy constrict what the publisher can do, and they can constrict our abilities to deliver on the end goals, you know, to use the corporate speak. So there has to be a balance between defining the end goals and not over specifying the routes, because that can over specifying the routes can undermine achieving the goal, really. And that's not easy. That's not tricky. Sorry, that's tricky. It's not at all easy, I think.
So I think we've had, would anybody else like to add anything from the experts? Or would you rather get into the discussion in the breakout rooms? Now's your chance. I can see some nodding. I think what we need now is we need Tobias to come and tell us about the breakout rooms, how they will be organized. We hope that we're not going to lose all of you at the tea breaks. We're going to have a tea coffee break for 5 minutes, but before that, Tobias will tell us how the breakout rooms will be organized. And then we'll come back, let's have a look at the time, at probably 8 minutes past 4. So after Tobias's briefing, 8 minutes past 4, and then you'll be put into a breakout room, and then we can really have more of a discussion on some of the inspirational speeches from the experts. Thank you very much, all of our experts, for their views, and please do share other opinions and views in those breakout rooms, and enjoy a discussion. So Tobias, over to you now to describe the breakout room process.
Thanks, Vanessa. Let me just share a link in the chat here, and my screen, which will be coming up right now. Oh, sorry. No, not that one. Can you see these slides now? Yeah?
Yes.
I see some nodding. That's great. Okay, so how the breakout rooms will work? It's we are going to assign you into groups of 7 to 8 people each group, and each group will be assigned a collaborative Google document per room with some guiding questions that the leads of this session have put together or prepared for you before the session. It would be great if the groups could each nominate a note taker, maybe a group of note takers, or you all join the task of making individual contributions or notes. And also please make sure to note down who actually is in your specific room, so that we are able to keep track of that for the later synthesis exercise that Vanessa and Agatha will be working on later on. The guiding questions I've mentioned already. It would be great if you could have a quick or a discussion of these points raised there, and either come to a consensus or explore areas of disagreement in that. And please make sure to make these explicit via the notes. That's why we have these shared notes for. What will happen after the tea break is I will open up a selection of breakout rooms, and each of you will then find one of these pop-up messages on your screen. And this will also indicate your choice of the shared document that you will be needing a link to later on. And this specific link is to be found in the chat meta pad that I have linked or put a link into the chat there. Yeah, please select the shared document according to your room assignment, and then add your input there and start the lively discussion, hopefully. For support questions or issues, I will be around in the main room if If technical difficulties arise and you happen to maybe drop out of a session, just come back into the main room and I'll be happy to help you back into the breakout room. And we have facilitators and session leaders, which will also circulate between the different rooms just to check in on the groups, so that this hopefully will run through very smoothly and have an engaged discussion there. And that's it so far. I think we're then off for a quick tea break, tea, coffee, whatever break. And yeah, we'll see each other back in 5 minutes, I think.
Yes, thanks very much. So thank you all, and I'm sure the rest of you did too. We've come to the end of this this series. I would like to hand over to Agatha and Lucy, though, who've been running this. I'd particularly like to thank them and Tom from the OABN network, you know, making this happen, everything, also picking up my mistakes and me ruining things today. Sorry about that. But, you know, really organizing things so well and really bringing all of these voices together. We're going to try and do you justice and try to synthesize and bring all of your voices together in a document. We know that there's not always consensus, but we want to kind of make that visible. And if there is a general agreement, we do that too. This will be passed on to Coalition S, but I think it's also helping us form our own priorities and thinking about what's important and what we need to do. For example, raising awareness, yes, of some of these aspects amongst our authors, and what might we want to do there. So I think that's also another result of these sessions. But yes, so do watch this space. We're going to be synthesizing the things that came out of this session, and we'll also be sharing that with the broader community on the OABN network. But so before we end, I'd like to hand over to Agatha and Lucy. I'd like to thank Tobias also today for holding the fort, for managing the breakout rooms and the timings, etc. And over to you, and thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you, Vanessa. We still have a poll. Do you still want me to run the poll, or shall we just skip it? Or shall we do it for the sake of tradition?
Let's do the poll.
Okay, let's do some polling. So today, 2 extremely straightforward questions for you. So the first one, do you agree to transfer full copyright to the publisher? Yes, no? And the second one, do you agree to mandate CC BY? So I will keep the poll open for another 30 seconds maybe, and let's see what happens. Okay, let's wait for another 10 seconds and then I will end the poll and share.
So how do we vote? Or I can't vote, is that it?
I think that you might be excluded from voting because you're one of the experts.
We're hosts. I think hosts can't vote.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry for that. Sorry for that. Okay, I'm ending the poll, sharing the results with you. I don't think that they are very surprising. So this is the first poll in all the section we had so far where we have 100% agreeing on something. So do you agree to transfer full copyright to the publisher? And there is a resounding no with 100%. And then for the second question, do you agree to mandate CC BY? A little bit more diversity here. So we have 37% saying yes and 63% saying no. Okay, I think that I'll stop with the poll here. And before I let you all go, from my part, I would like to say the biggest thank you to Lucy, Toby, Tom Mostert, and Tom G, because without you, we would never ever be able to pull this off. And I think we did. So Lucy, over to you. And I am about to pour myself some wine to celebrate that we actually survived all these sections. Thank you. And thank you, a big thank you also to the community and all people who were coming here for all these sessions, participating. It was really, really interesting to hear your voices. So Lucy, over to you.
Yeah, I've shared a couple of links in the chat just to encourage everyone to stay in touch with the OABN. To come along to more events, to chat on the discussion boards, to follow us on Twitter, because it has been really great, really interesting, really useful to get so many people together to talk about some of these things. And we'd like to keep that community engaged as much as possible. And also to reiterate Agata's thanks to Toby and to the two Toms as well, who've helped us a lot. And thanks to Agata for kind of co-leading it with me in kind of her inimitable fashion. So yeah, so thank you everyone for coming, and please stay in touch.
Maybe with just one last thing, I'd like to just say that the notepads, they're going to be open till at least to the end of this week. So if you didn't have the chance to say what you really wanted to say, please put it in the document or help the note takers and add your thoughts into those notes because, you know, we'd really appreciate it. So the more clarity we have there, the better, and the better we can represent your views. So till the end of this week, end of Sunday. Thanks very much, everybody. Let's stay in touch. Yes.
Thank you so much. So
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.